In this video, I'm going to talk about economic systems and how they work, and laissez-faire market-oriented systems versus command systems a little bit. And talk about the tie between freedom, especially economic freedom, the freedom to make economic choices, and how that ties into economic growth, and a little bit about the philosophy of how that works. Um, Laissez-faire, of course, means leave it alone, let it be, or allow people to do things, make their own choices without government interference. A command system is where, in strictly speaking, the government is making all the decisions, telling people where to work, how to produce things, what to produce, setting the prices for goods. If they do that, they could just directly distribute the goods in some other way instead of setting prices and having any sort of market. What's the problem with a command system, and why do economists love free markets and normally, not always, but in most cases, want the market, let individuals, meaning individual companies and individual people, make the decisions? One of the biggest problems with a command system is that there's really practically no way for a person or a group of people to have enough information to make all of the economic decisions that would need to be made. They would have to know how much people value different things. They would have to know about all of the opportunity costs, all of the trade-offs in using one method of making a product versus another. They would have to know about the quantities of things to produce, the quantities of inputs needed to produce the things, and it becomes a messy mathematical system quickly, even if you did have all this information. Probably the most developed example of a command system was the former Soviet Union. And in the Soviet Union, they had some of the most brilliant minds and computer scientists working on this problem about how to, just suppose you want to decide how many cars to produce. Okay, then you have to decide how to produce a car. What's the best way to produce a car? What are the parts? And then what are the things that are needed to make the parts? So how much steel do you need? And then how much coal do you need to make the steel? How much iron ore? How many people do you need to be in the mine, mining coal versus mining iron ore? And then how are you going to mine it? With a tractor or with steam shovels? It's just a dizzying array of things that you need to figure out when you have a command system, and it never did work out very well. Now, the basic idea in laissez-faire or market economies is that prices adjust up or down using supply and demand. And these prices send signals to producers about whether more or less of something should be produced. They send signals to consumers about whether they should buy more or less of something. It basically sends signals about value. And the higher the price, this is automatically going to tell people that maybe I should use less of this because the opportunity cost is higher. It's also, a higher price is going to automatically tell people that they should be trying to produce more of this product because the reward is potentially higher. And so automatically, a lot of these things will work properly if you just let people do it themselves. Because all the people making individual decisions have all of the information that they need. It's not just a small group of people making a decision for everyone at the top. So that's the idea. And you hear about the idea of the invisible hand. And the invisible hand is just people reacting to incentives, people responding to the prices and the incentives that they see. Now, when we talk about freedom, there are a lot of ways that you can define freedom, but mostly here we're talking about economic freedom. Economic freedom just meaning that people have the freedom to own property, decide what they're going to do with their own property and their own time, decide what jobs they're going to take, what businesses they're going to open, the freedom for businesses to fail if they're not doing a good job or if they're not doing things in the most efficient way. Now, when we talk about economic freedom, I gave you some examples of command and control systems like Cuba or the former Soviet Union. Don't seem to work very well. North Korea, not doing very well using this kind of system. Let's talk about the United States, since that's where I am. People would rank United States as a mostly free, not totally market system when it comes to our economy. There are a lot of cases where the government interferes quite a lot in some markets, and I'll talk about those in just a second. So we're mostly free, which instead of being a pure market system or a pure command system, we are what most countries are. We're a mixed economy. Some government intervention, a lot of freedom. So we're mostly free. Let me give you some examples of some things where we're not free. One example that most people would be familiar with in the United States would be automobile insurance. Not a free market by any stretch of the imagination. In the United States, in most states, it does differ by state, but in most states, individuals who have a car are required to buy automobile insurance, particularly liability insurance if they hit someone. So when there's a government requiring people to buy it, it's not an individual market decision. Looking at the price, deciding whether to buy and how much to buy. Another thing about car insurance is that the price of car insurance is set by the government also in most states, not the market system, not supply and demand setting prices. Another example would be, this is one that most people are unaware of in the United States, would be the milk market. In the U.S., I am not free to go buy some cows and start milking them and sell that milk. That's illegal in the United States. The only people who are allowed to make milk are people who have been in the dairy industry for many, 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 many years. New entrants are not allowed. There's a lot of regulation about how many cows existing milk producers can have. There's a lot of government regulation about the price of milk. So it's not a free market where supply and demand are in play, where businesses are allowed to fail, where people are allowed to enter and produce more if they want to. Now, if you want to get into the milk industry in the United States, I'm afraid the only way to do it is to buy some goats, and you can start milking the goats and sell goat's milk. That is a free market, as far as I'm aware, in the United States. But cow milk is not. Let me go through, show you one more example in the United States, and that's the U.S. Post Office. The U.S. Postal Service. They are a government organization that produces a service, which is the service of delivering first-class mail. First-class mail is when you take a letter, fold it up, put it in an envelope, and send it to someone. They're the only people allowed to do this service in the United States. It's illegal for anyone else to take anything out of a mailbox or put anything into a mailbox. Now, I know what you're thinking if you're from the U.S. Federal Express and UPS, don't they deliver mail too? Well, they mostly deliver packages. And if you get a letter, that letter looks more like a package. It's in a big cardboard envelope. And they have to bring it to your front door rather than driving by and stuffing it in your mailbox. So nobody else is allowed to do that except for this government agency. Now, what is the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that when there's no competition, maybe the post office is not doing it correctly. Maybe they're not delivering mail in the cheapest way, the most efficient way possible. Maybe they're not doing it in the highest quality way. Maybe they could deliver the mail faster. Federal Express and UPS, I think both at different times have come up with proposals about how they would be happy to take over delivering first class mail and about how they could do it more cheaply, faster, with better service. But it still hasn't happened. So these are some of the problems when you have these government dictates. Who knows if the price is set correctly? The price of sending a letter is set by the government. There's no competition allowed. Maybe there are better ways to do this. So some inefficiency is going to creep in. The U.S. Post Office doesn't have any good reason to cut costs since there's nobody that's going to come and put them out of business. One other problem with the post office is at some point maybe we don't need one anymore. I mean, there's email now, and most packages aren't delivered by the post office anymore. Most letters aren't sent on paper, they're sent via text message or by email these days. And so we need less and less of this service, but the question would be, has the United States Post Office gotten smaller and smaller and smaller in proportion to the amount of fewer letters and bills and things that are being mailed these days? The answer is probably no. Mostly what I get these days are junk mail through my mailbox these days. So this brings up another idea about free market systems, and that's the idea of creative destruction. And creative destruction means that if you're a business that we no longer need, maybe the post office or blacksmiths making horseshoes for horses. Not very many people have horses anymore. We don't ride them as often as we did 100 years ago or 150 years ago. So some businesses needed to be destroyed. They needed to go out of business. Why? Well, creative destruction means we're going to use those resources for something that's more useful after the business goes out of business. Also, if you're a business that's producing things in an expensive way or not producing things at a high quality, you need to be allowed to fail. That's another idea of creative destruction. Let somebody else use those employees and those buildings. We shouldn't have a government program to prop up a business that is doing a poor job or that's not needed anymore. Maybe we ought to let it fail and use those resources somewhere else. Now, the last idea, well, the third idea I'm going to talk about is Adam Smith. So let me go down here and talk about Adam Smith a little bit. Adam Smith, most people consider the father of economics. Even though there were some philosophers and theologians who thought about some economic questions before Adam Smith did, he was really the first one to sit down and systematically start thinking about what are the things that lead to a nation being wealthy or a nation being poor. Now, most people just abbreviate the title of his book as The Wealth of Nations, which doesn't make much sense. The full title is a little awkward, but it gives you an idea of what he was thinking about. An inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Now, at the time he wrote this is 1770s. It was published in 1776, same year that the U.S. Declaration of Independence was written. The idea of what makes a nation wealthy was mostly from the standpoint of a king. So you had the king and you had your subjects. What made you wealthy as a king was a pile of gold sitting in a vault somewhere. Now, why did that make you wealthy? Well, because it gave you security. If you needed to put down a revolution, what you needed was gold to pay some soldiers. If you needed to invade a country, what you needed was gold to buy some weapons, hire some soldiers, build some ships, and have some cannon made. So to defend yourself, to attack and take new land to keep your own subjects in line, gold was what you needed. Nowadays, economists don't see gold as a measure of wealth. It's quite an inconsequential sort of thing. Every once in a while, I'll hear someone mention the gold in Fort Knox, and my response is always, so what? That gold's not really that important for anything. It doesn't really have anything to do with our economy these days. What we want these days, what we think about makes a successful economy, is one where people are free to choose what they want to do, where they're happy, where they have the material possessions that will make them healthy and make them successful in life, however people define that for themselves. Now, Adam Smith, again, he was one of the first ones to think about markets and how they work, and he was credited with this idea of the invisible hand. And let's look at this first quote. I encourage you to pause the video and read this. I'm just going to discuss a couple of parts of it. Now, what he's saying here is, we don't see animals get together and make trades to help each other. But with humans, we humans can't survive without other humans. Or we could go live in the wilderness by ourselves, but we're not going to be nearly as wealthy or prosperous than if we surround ourselves with other people who are going to help us out. Now, the key question here is why? Well, if I have to do everything myself, that means I have to build my own house, I have to teach my own children, I have to grow my own food, I have to build my own computers. No one person can do all these things very well. So what we rely on are people who are going to specialize and trade. Specialize and trade. Those are the two keys. So the plumber is going to be good at plumbing. The home builder will be good at building homes. The teacher will be good at teaching. And the farmer will be good at growing food. And what we're going to do is we're all going to work hard producing things. And we're going to trade with others. Well, not just things, but things and services. So Adam Smith here says, man always needs the help of his brethren. But if I need your help, how am I going to get your help? Well, I'm not going to expect you to help me just because you're feeling in a good mood and you're feeling nice. Other people are going to help you because you're going to help them. Now, how are you going to help them? Well, if you're the farmer, you're going to help him by making some bacon or by growing some wheat. And you're going to trade that wheat to somebody else for something that they produced. And you're both going to be better off. So people are going to be more likely to prevail. They're going to get what they want if they can interest their self-love in his favor. So that means that you're going to do something for me because you love yourself. And because you want something, you're going to do something for me. So it's for their own advantage to do for him what he requires of him. I need a house and you're going to build it for me. Why? Well, because I'm going to pay you money, and then you're going to use that money to buy some other things with. So give me that which I want, you shall have this which you want, is the meaning of every such offer. And in this manner we will obtain from each other most of what we produce. So most of what you're going to make, you're not going to keep for yourself. You're going to trade to other people. Specialization and trade. Let me share with you another quote from Adam Smith here. This quote is quite a bit longer. Let me give you the chance here to pause and read the whole thing if you want. This is a famous example of Adam Smith, and he took a trip to a pin making factory. And these pins, these are the straight pins that are used to hold cloth together when you're sewing it, or if you buy a shirt, it might have some of these pointy pins with a little ball on the top stuck in them. So what Adam Smith is saying here is, if you had to do it all by yourself, suppose you had to make a pin, a little sharp pointy piece of wire with a round head on the top. How many could you make in a day? Well, you could spend all day and maybe working as hard as you could with the utmost industry make one. And I agree. It would be tough for me to make that many pins. I could probably make 20 pretty bad pins if I had to. But that would be relying on some other parts that other people had made. I wouldn't be making the wire from scratch, right? Um, but he says even within this factory, it's not just that one factory is going to make pins and trade it to other people. Even within the factory, there's specialization. One person draws out the wire, a second person straightens it out, a third cuts it, a fourth sharpens the point on it, a fifth grinds the top flat for putting the head on. Just to make these little round heads requires 2 or 3 distinct operations. To put the head on the pin is its own special business, its own particular unique thing. And so he's saying that even within a factory, specialization, not just that everybody shouldn't make their own pins, we should have a factory to make the pins. But even within pin manufacturing, there's specialization. If each person gets good at one tiny part of the job, they'll be able to produce a lot more. Now, he says he went to this pin factory and he saw 10 people make 48,000 pins in a day. So that's about 5,000 pins per person. And keep in mind, this is almost 250 years ago. That's insane to me to imagine that 250 years ago that they could produce that many pins in a little workshop. So he's further going into the idea that specialization in trade is useful. Now, a lot of people criticize this kind of mass manufacturing because if all you do all day is sharpen the head of a pin or sharpen the point of a pin, that's boring, it's dehumanizing, and you're going to go out of your mind eventually. And Adam Smith addresses this. And in society and in the business world, we've been addressing this a little bit as well recently. But people don't give Adam Smith credit for realizing that even though specialization is great, it also can come at a cost. He says, if you spend your whole life performing a few simple tasks and that's all you ever do, then you're not ever going to have a chance to exert your understanding or to exercise your inventiveness in finding out ways to do things faster, more expediently, or for removing difficulties. You're not going to have the chance to exercise those parts of your brain, and eventually, since you don't have the habit of thinking, exerting your mind, generally you're going to become as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human to become. So he realizes the benefit of specialization, but at the same time he realizes that, we don't want people to lose their humanity and just become a machine. Which raises the point that how pens are made these days. They're just made by a machine. These repetitive tasks are great for machines to do, not as great for humans to do. And eventually, if you're doing something simple and repetitive like this, you're going to be replaced by a machine. Even if you're doing something a little more complex, maybe you're going to be replaced by a robot or a computer one day. Businesses have found over the last 30 or 40 years that rather than using people as machines, letting people have time, like, Google's a famous example, but even, companies like General Electric, Honda, Ford, General Motors as well, have found that they can be a lot more productive with happier, healthier employees, but also save money and time by letting their employees have input into how these tasks are done. If you want to know how to sharpen a pen better, let the guy who does it all day long give you some input into how to do it better. Maybe he can invent a machine that will do that by itself, allowing that employee to do something of more value for your company. So, These are just some of the thousands of ideas that Adam Smith discussed in his book, over 1,200 pages if you get it in paperback, about how nations become wealthier and about how the market system works. The last thing I want to talk to you about today is economic freedom and its relationship to GDP. A lot of studies have found this over the last 100 years, and there's a lot more research going on right now about the connection between economic freedom and GDP. I got this graph from the Mercatus Center. This is from data in 2012, but on the internet you can find a lot of graphs that show a very similar kind of relationship. On the x-axis here we have some measures of an economic freedom index. To what extent are people allowed to choose where they work, whether they start businesses, what kind of businesses they can do, whether businesses are allowed to fail, creative destruction, private property rights, whether they're enforced or not. So, which just means if I have a business, the government can't just come and steal it from me. And what we see is this relationship between increasing freedom and increasing per capita GDP. That's what you get if you take all of the stuff that was made in a year in a country and you divided it equally among every man, woman, and child in a country. That's per capita GDP. You see Zimbabwe down here at the bottom end of both scales. Zimbabwe, decades ago, was a food exporter. They had a lot of large farms that were very, very productive, and they could produce a lot more food than they needed in their country, and they exported food to the rest of Africa and other places in the world. But a couple of decades ago, beginning maybe 1 or 2 decades ago, the government decided, we're going to take these productive farms and we're going to chop up the land and we're going to give it away to people. That'll be more fair. Those rich people who have those farms, they don't deserve it, and it would be more fair to take those farms and divide it up and give that land away to other people. Regardless of whether these people know how to manage farms, a lot of people were given this land. And what has happened is Zimbabwe is now a huge food importer. Things just aren't run as efficiently as they were. And a lot of that land that people were given is just sitting there doing nothing. Venezuela, another one down here at the bottom left-hand corner, relatively low GDP and relatively low economic freedom, especially in the last decade or so. There's a famous case of Venezuela made a deal with Exxon to develop some oil fields. And Exxon was doing a great job developing the oil fields, making a lot of money and paying royalties to the government as they agreed. And then Venezuela saw this. Hey, Exxon's also making money. Let's take it. So they went and took Exxon's equipment, took the oil fields, and kicked Exxon out. And now those oil fields are not as productive as they used to be. The government of Venezuela is mismanaging things. What's more, when you go and you take people's farms and businesses away for no reason, and you give that property that people worked hard to develop to other random people, you send the message that if you work hard and you're successful, this is what could happen to you. The government will just take your stuff and give it away. That's not a way to have a productive society. On the other end here, you see the United States, mostly free at around a 7.5 on this economic freedom index, measuring various aspects of economic freedom. Singapore and Hong Kong, much more free over here. We see some interesting outliers here. Luxembourg, very small country with not a lot of land and not a lot of people. A lot of financial transactions done in Luxembourg, though. I think some of it's similar to why Switzerland has a lot of finance there. You can put a lot of wealth in Luxembourg and maybe people won't find out about it as much. So not a lot of people, a lot of banking revenue generated. So that's why they have such high GDP, slightly less economic freedom than the U.S. or Switzerland or some of these other places. The United Arab Emirates and Kuwait and Norway are all rich oil nations. And so that's what's going on with those three there. Singapore and Hong Kong are two hot spots where there's not a lot of government intervention, not a lot of restrictions on what you can do and what you can't do or how you have to do things. And when you compare Singapore and Hong Kong's GDP per capita to other countries in the region, such as China or Vietnam, you see how well they're doing in comparison. And most people give a lot of credit to the economic freedom that's there. So I'm going to end this video now. Good luck in your economic studies. And as always, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to contact me.